Hello, everybody. My name is Pedro Alexeyev, and today our lecture is concerned about ASP.NET. This is web application development technology from Microsoft, and today we have to cover the following topics. So we will start with idea of ASP.NET, which just describes briefly what itself it is in a glance. So why it was developed, your basics, its some features, and some basic knowledge about this. The next we will talk about data persistence. So the data persistence, you actually know what it is. So it's a way of storing data, for example, in database. For example, for our case, for web applications, in our case in ASP.NET, which technologies, which ways of data persistence can be used, and what their specific features might be. The next topic is about web forms and controls. So this is probably the most interesting part of our lecture. It describes some basic ideas of how web applications can be developed with ASP.NET and how it basically can be arranged with Visual Studio. The next topic is master pages. Master pages is a way of creating templates for HTML pages in ASP.NET. So actually we are going to briefly say some words about this and going through the example. For validation, we were talking about validation some time ago when we are talking about our assignment, and we are talking about JavaScript. And here we will see how this validation was implemented in ASP.NET, including server-side validation and client-side with JavaScript validation. The next topic is ASP.NET AJAX. So this is an implementation of AJAX in ASP.NET, and we will see how it may be used. So how easy this can be done with ASP.NET for general ASP.NET web page. The almost last topic of our current lecture is security. So with this topic, we will talk about security features of ASP.NET, and I will show you an example of how these features might be used. And we will finally conclude with some sentences about ASP.NET in a glance, and also I will briefly describe you what was not covered with our lecture, because unfortunately ASP.NET is too complex to be, let's say, zipped in one just basic lecture. It requires a special course to be learned in a good way. So we will just basically describe what it is there and finally finish. And let me start with ideas of ASP.NET. So what itself ASP.NET means? So ASP, it means active server pages. .NET means .NET. It's funny, but it is. So the ASP, or active server pages, is quite old technology for web development from Microsoft, and ASP.NET was developed as a successor for ASP, so for this technology. So ASP.NET is very universal platform for web applications development. So you are able to develop various types of web applications with ASP.NET. You can use almost every browser for your web application. So you are maybe not oriented to specific web browser. You might be oriented to general case. So this is quite common. Also, you can use different way of software development with ASP.NET. Here we can highlight web forms, web pages, and MVC pattern support. So what's the idea? The idea of web forms is a development of web applications in a style quite related to the style of development, for example, window applications. So you have this almost the same or pretty related controls in your toolbox, for example, in Visual Studio, and you basically can just drag and drop these controls on your web form, and this will be, during the execution of your application, will be automatically transformed in HTML and transferred to your browser. With web pages, this is pretty related a way of development of web applications, but the idea of web pages is a bit simpler because it allows you to create not just a quite huge web application for business applications, but it allows you to create a simplified version for websites, for example, for blogs, for just basic websites for general companies. And also it allows you to use simplified syntax of definition of this user interface. With MVC, development MVC in ASP.NET MVC is dramatically different from ASP.NET web forms or web pages because there's no any control there. There is support for model view controller pattern, and basically this allows you to have more control on your generated HTML code, and it allows you to decompose the whole your application into three more or less independent components, and this in advance and allows you to use more complex testing, so you are able to support some test-driven development better with MVC. But itself development is, from my point of view, is harder than with web forms, for example. And of course, as ASP.NET was developed in Microsoft, and it utilizes Microsoft development technologies, so it utilizes Visual Studio to be developed for web applications development, and general languages for software development, C# and Visual Basic.NET. So these two languages are used for .NET in Microsoft .NET development. So I hope there's no need to describe what is .NET itself, or is there a need for it? Okay, thank you. So what are the main features of ASP.NET? The first one is full object-oriented programming. So for each element of your web page and the page itself, there's an object-oriented description and implementation. So you basically can have an access to all properties of your web page, or each control of your web page as an object, and use its properties, methods. You can touch your handlers for events and so on. So you can freely utilize your knowledge of object-oriented programming. You can create, for example, your own controls by inheriting existing controls, and so on. Also, ASP.NET is based on compiling. What does that mean? That means ASP.NET is based on using .NET, one of .NET languages, which requires to use compiler before this application can be executed. So all these approaches, what you're using for creation of your application, requires you to compile it first before it might be executed. In some cases, for example, in ASP.NET web pages, this compiling may be done transparently. So you just basically can upload some source files to the web server, and these files will be compiled there. But this compilation process will occur before the application will be executed itself. And also this compilation allows you to reach quite good performance, of course, because it's not an interpreted version. Also, ASP.NET utilizes well-known web technologies. Of course, if you're developing web application in ASP.NET, you have to have some knowledge about HTML itself. So you have to know what is, for example, HTML layout, what is HTML elements are, some tags you have to know, and so on. Also, in latest versions of ASP.NET, HTML5 is quite good supported. And of course, CSS and CSS3, and JavaScript. Well, talking about JavaScript, one can say that if you're developing web application in ASP.NET, In most cases, you don't have to know JavaScript at all. Because, for example, for client-side validation where JavaScript is required, this JavaScript is already developed. So then you basically put some validation controls on your web page. This JavaScript automatically will be connected to your web page and will be automatically executed. Then this control will be used there. AJAX also used in can be used in ASP.NET applications, but of course, you know what, with AJAX you have to know some things, not just JavaScript. You have to know something like HTTP request features of JavaScript. You have to know ways of transferring data between client and server and so on. With AJAX implementation is in ASP.NET, this process was transparent. So basically can utilize almost the same controls as in the usual development of ASP.NET applications, and that's it. There are different state management mechanisms supported by ASP.NET. Why they are needed? Because, as you already know, HTTP does not provide us state management itself, because this is a stateless protocol. But between between each request to the client, from the client to the server, for example, on server side, there's a need to store some state about this the previous request. For example, it might be some data captured from database, or some data which have to be cached there before they could be written into the database. So ASP.NET provides its own features for state management. And this state, of course, is saved on the server side, and on the client side, there's a connection by using, for example, cookies with specific session identifier. Of course, ASP.NET is, as a technology for development of web applications, requires the support of some object-related mapping or databases there, and there are some abilities to do this, and we will go there correspondent slide. But I can say that these ORMs usually are the same for general .NET applications, which might be not just ASP.NET, this might be something different. Almost last here on this slide, but not last from the importance point of view, the security. The security for web applications is very important, as you know, because there's a need to support different users, their roles, to control their access control rules, and so on. And there's, let's say, out-of-the-box support for this security in ASP.NET. And of course, you can extend it by using your own features of security if you really need it. And finally, here in this slide is something about multi-threaded asynchronous operations. So what does it mean? This basically means that if you have web application, there are usually several users who simultaneously work with your application, right? And with ASP.NET, all the requests will be processed in the different threads. So every ASP.NET application is multi-threaded application. And in latest versions of ASP.NET, there's a support for better using this multi-threading. For example, you are able to say that, for example, this part of this particular request will be processed in a different thread than usually it should supposed to be done. So this allows you to increase performance of your application and provide better performance for your users. Or, for example, provide better scalability, or provide ability to support more users simultaneously. ASP.NET utilizes so-called event model. So what is it used and what does it mean? What itself is every web application. according to HTTP protocol, there is a HTTP request. This request comes to the server, and server has to process it and create a response. And everything that comes between this committed request and submitted response is itself a web application. So the process or processing of these requests might be divided into several stages. And this is done in ASP.NET. And all stage is accomplished to a specific event. And here is a list of main events. There are just 4 of them: init, load, pre-render, and unload. Let me briefly describe all of these events to you. So the first event is init. This event occurs when a user just requested specific web page, and this web page started to be processing. So this event means what the object of this web page just initialized in the memory, and the state of this web page was not restored. What does it mean that this state is not restored? This basically means that the page is just loaded to the memory, and the state of all its controls and all the information what might be previously submitted to the client from this web page, from the previous response on this web page, is not restored yet. So this basically means that the state is not restored yet. With load event, this state is already restored, and you're able to see what actually happens with your page. So you're basically able to manipulate this with this data. Pre-render is the last event which occurs before so-called rendering of page. So what's the rendering of pages in ASP.NET? This is translating the object-oriented representation of the page from the memory into HTML. So you're able so this process is called rendering. And this is the last chance to manipulate this object-oriented representation of the web page and its controls in the memory. And unload is the last event of a web page. This is almost like init, but controversial. For example, init might be utilized to acquire some data, some variables, and unload to remove them from memory, and so on. Between load and pre-render events, so basically here, they might be so-called server-side validation, because we are restored all the information from the web page during the load event. So we are able to check if this data is consistent according to the request data from the client. So this request might contain some information from the web form which was submitted to the server. And we are able to check if it's consistent. Data binding. Now, data binding is another event which might occur if we are using some data bounded controls in our web page. So these controls basically usually display some data, for example, from the database. So the process of filling of these controls with this data is data binding. So this occurs here. And the last here is events from controls. Well, these events occur if, for example, some text box or input type text element, HTML elements, was used by the user on the client side. He or she just submitted some text in this control, and this information was submitted to the server, and finally we are able to see that the contents of this control was changed. So we are able to connect our event handler to this event and say something, do something according to these changes. Also, these events might be, for example, button clicks. So if these button clicks need to be processed on the server side, we are able to do this here. So let me follow this with the data persistence. supported by ASP.NET. So, talking about data persistence and data access of web applications, we have to say a few words about pessimistic and optimistic concurrency. Is anybody can say a few words about pessimistic and optimistic concurrency here? Okay, I expected. So, what is pessimistic concurrency? You have a database and several users which works with your application with this database simultaneously. And how will you deal with the situation when two or more users want to have an access for writing, for example, to the same record or the same table in the database? How can you deal with this situation? What are the options for you? Yes, you can just basically block it. So only the first user will be able to even, for example, read it, and other users have to wait for you while this user will finish working with this record. This is called pessimistic concurrency. It has some disadvantages. For example, it provides quite bad scalability, because if there are lots of users of your application, the number of these logs will be huge, and this will just basically reduce the performance of your application, because lots of users will have to just wait for each other in this case. With optimistic concurrency, there's no such logs. So all users are able to read the same data from the database, and they're even able to write it. But there might be some problems with this, because different users might just try to write different data to the same record. And who's going to be winner in this competition? It depends, because there is no specific rule for handling such situations. It depends on the specific of your application. So it allows you to have better scalability, optimistic concurrency, but it requires to handle such unwanted situations, then first detect them and handle somehow such situations when different users try to have an access to the same data row. And in web applications where the number of users is usually quite big, we have to use optimistic concurrency. And all of these data access technologies presented in this slide, they support optimistic concurrency. The old style, the so-called old-styled technologies like ADO.NET, ADO.NET, in particular data sets or data readers, they were developed the same moment. They were submitted to the market at the same time then the first version of ASP.NET was deployed. So they provided optimistic concurrency by using so-called data sets, which might be treated as some sort of local memory, some sort of data cache of some data from database. And data reader was very, very simple way of getting access to the database, like submitting their SQL request and receiving response on this request. Well, data sets, I cannot say that they were a real object-related mappings, because it was really, really simple and not very, very useful from the developer perspective, because it required some knowledge about the database, and it was not very useful. So later on, it was changed or replaced with link you to SQL. This is a little mistake here, because this is this link you to. This is supposed to be link you to SQL, or link you to SQL without two additional. Okay, I'm sorry for this. The idea of this was to use so-called integrated queries into the code of, for example, C# or Visual Basic.NET, and you are able to write these queries in your code, and this will allow you to get an access with these queries to specific database. So the idea was quite related, because to have such ability, you have to describe some sort of a data cache of your data from the database. But it also might be considered as very basic object-related mappings, but it was not very useful. For example, if you have to have many-to-many connections in your database, relations in your database, or you have to work with database which is different from Microsoft SQL Server. And currently in ASP.NET, the following ORMs are used quite frequently, which are ADO.NET entities, which is normal, let's say, with modern features of object-related mapping, and Hibernate, which is related to Hibernate, developed initially for Java, but was translated to .NET and rewritten there. And let me briefly describe it, which is LINQ. It's an abbreviation of Language Integrated Query, and it's basically just some extensions of programming language. They have the syntax quite related to SQL, so you basically get just able to write some SQL-related code in your application, in your source code, and this code will be checked according to type checking, strong type checking, which is used in .NET, and you're able to have sort in the group in data and so on. So you have an abilities to retrieve this data in various ways. So you're able to do a lot of things like this. And of course, LINQ is also useful not just for data from databases. It's also possible to use it for some objects in memory, for example, like arrays, or also for XML. So you're able to have an XML file, and you're able to write such related code for access specific XML data from this file using pretty the same ideas. So let me finally come to the demonstration, as long as I do not have much time, but I will try to do my best. So I already started Visual Studio. I'm going to show how to create basic database with this Visual Studio. Let's start with creating a new project of web application. So this will be a new web forms application. Yeah, it takes some time. Yeah. So it just basically adds currently references to different assemblies of .NET. Well, finally we have our application. We are able even to start it. This is quite a simple application, web application. Currently we are not going to change the code. We are going to just add a database on it. So this is just a created application by default. Quite simple one with a few pages. Well, let's add a database to this solution. So we have a specific ASP.NET folder for storing some data, particularly for databases, and we are able to add a new database there. We're able to provide some name for this database. Let's store with some products and call it products DB. Okay. Okay, database was created, but it's empty. We have to create a new table first. So let me start creating a new table. Yes. Okay. So we have to store some products, and let's call the identifier field product ID. And we're going to use identity specification for it. The next field will be the name of the product. The next, for example, will be price. And the last one will be URL. Let's assign specific types. This will be maximum 5 symbols of Unicode here, string. The price will be money, of course. And URL, let's say, also will be Unicode, but a bit more characters will be there. And all of these fields will be required, right? And you can see here below the generated SQL code for this table, and let's just briefly assign a name for this table. Products, okay? And finally, we are able to update the database with all of this. So we have to create an update script for this database because we are, for example, may not just create a new table, we are able to update the existing one. So we update the database. Yes, everything is okay. And finally, we are able to see if we have there our table. Yes, we have, but the table is empty. But we are going to fill it with data a bit later. Oops. Okay. We created a new database. Let's create an object-related mapping to this database. Quite a simple one because we do not have much time. Okay, let's do this. So what are we going to do? We have to create a new item, which will be entity data model. I will leave the name for this data model file by default, and I'm going to create it from the existing database. Of course, there is an ability to create it from just from scratch with this basic data model here, this designer, and then it's possible to even create a database from this existing designer code. And it's also in the newest versions of ASPNET entities, it's also possible to just basically create a description of some entities with classes and then generate automatically a database for this. Okay, we have a connection to our database. We are going to store this connection string in our configuration file. And we have information about our tables of our database. And we are going to singularize or pluralize the names of our table, because the name of the table is products, but the name of corresponding entity will be product. Okay, let's make it. It also takes some time. Okay, here we are. So you can see this is a definition of specific entity which corresponds to our table. And it's also possible to see how these parameters or how these properties are mapped to specific field of corresponding table in database. So you can see it here. All right, and these are object-related representation, and this is relative database representation. So we created it finally. Let's go further. We still have some time, so have to be hurry. So let me follow with web forms and controls. So this will basically describes how these applications are developed in the ASP.NET. So what is a control? If you have an experience of developing Windows applications, you know what control is. It's some sort of element of user interface which allows for user to manipulate with some data, to represent some data, and so on. The same idea was utilized in ASP.NET. So in ASP.NET, this is a model of specific HTML elements or a group of HTML elements from the server-side perspective. So why from the server-side perspective? Because we are using object-oriented programming, and this object-oriented programming is used on the server side. And why? Well, of course, we can say about specific HTML element. Okay, it's okay. For example, if we have an object-oriented representation of input element. But why about group of elements? Well, in some cases, there is no possibility to create a specific control representation on the client side with just one single HTML element. For example, if you want to have a representation of calendar, of just 1 month calendar, there's no possibility to have just one specific element for this, of HTML element for this. You are able to create such representation on a client side with table HTML element, but this will require several elements embedded in it. So that's why a one control might be represented on the client side with group of elements. And there are some types of these controls. The basic one is HTML controls, which are completely mapped to specific HTML elements. For example, like HTML element input type text, right? Or input type button. Web controls, this is a more complex type of controls, so they are not completely mapped to these HTML elements. So they might be, on the server side, might be implemented with just one element, but on the client side, they might be implemented by a group of elements or with very specific elements representation. User controls. This is also very interesting stuff because it allows you to have several of controls in your platform, to group them together and describe them in a different file. So you are able to decompose the whole complex web page into several parts with using this user controls approach. Each user control not just corresponds to a specific set of elements on the client side. It also have some object-oriented representation on the server side, so you're able to work with it as an object. And finally, custom controls. Well, basically, if you're not satisfied with existing HTML controls or web controls, you're able to develop your own control. For example, by creating a successor of class of corresponding to web control, one of web controls. So it's up to you how to use it. And pages in ASP.NET. So web page or web form is a representation of HTML document, object-oriented representation on the server side. It has abilities for request processing. It has these events what I showed to you previously. Well, to be frankly speaking, all controls has all the same, almost the same events, but the page is the main point of modification of this, of attaching event handlers to these events and manipulating the data. And some properties of these object or related to page are very useful. For example, page itself. So this is, let's say, self linked to self, to the same page, and it provides some properties related to this page. For example, like properties representing code page or whatever represents a corresponding HTML document. Request and response They are links to corresponding objects, which represents, from the object-oriented programming perspective, HTTP request and HTTP response. So that you basically are able to derive HTML parameters of your URL and some data specific to client's browser from this property. And this property might be utilized to submit some data to the client from the server. The server property might be also useful to get an access to specific object related to the description of the server. So with server object, you are able to map your virtual path to physical path of the file in a server file system, for example. And there are alternative ways of request processing, because web page is used for general request processing in ASP.NET. But there are alternative ways of doing the same, more lightweight approaches. The first one is generic handler. With generic handler, you do not have controls, you do not have any specific even HTML document layout there. You're able, for example, with generic handlers to generate image on the fly and just basically write it into the response. Okay, so you can dynamically generate image and write it into the response. And another alternative way of request processing is modules. It's another way of extending ASP.NET infrastructure, and it is implemented with related way. Okay, so we are going to have a short break now. Let's take a break. Let's continue. Once we created a model for our data, let's create a manipulation with this data from web-based user interface. So we are here have a default ASPX page, which contains some layout. And we are going to add a button to this layout, which allows us to manipulate with data. We are going to basically add some test data to our database. So we are going to basically drag and drop this button to our form, like this. And this is actually how this is done, usually done in ASP.NET. And we are going to just basically adjust this button to provide it some parameters. Now we are going to move it to the right position. And also we are going to specify the correct name for this button, like go to late data. All right, now we are able to create a server-side event handler for click event of this button by double-clicking on it. And currently we are going to create code which will utilize ASP.NET entity data model to populate our database with sample data. As long as we used database named products, so the corresponding automatically generated class which will represent the data in this database will be product DB entities, which was automatically generated when we created ASP.NET entities, .NET entities data model, and we are going to create a new instance of this class. Now we are going to create a new instance of class which represents one product, and we are going to initialize properties of this class instance. The first one was name. We're going to specify product name. The next one is price, will be 100. And the last one is URL. We're going to specify like this. This will be okay, but we would like to create several of these products. Well, it's not a big problem. We can create a loop. So this will be like this. For example, 10. iterations will be enough for us, or maybe even 20, doesn't matter. And we will just create like this, and we will update this a bit to just make it more interesting. Like this, and finally like this. All right. Okay, now we just created several objects, but we have to add them to our local storage, which is quite obvious because our local storage is represented by variable db, and we have to add our created objects to correspondent property products, which represents these products in our db later on. So we are going on each iteration of this loop to add this created object there. And finally, unless we just created this construction in our memory, we have to save it in our database. One can ask why on this particular line of code the information about the creating product may just basically be written to the database. And the answer is quite simple, because in this case there will be 20 requests to the database server, which is not very useful, while there might be just one request which contains information about 20 added products in the same request. So to create this request, we are going to use the following syntax: db save settings. This will be enough. So let's start our application and see what will be there. All right, you can see our button, and we can basically just click on this button. And it looks like nothing happened. But this is not true, because if I will open our database diagram, so we will see that our table is not empty anymore, because it contains this temporal data. So you can see it was basically populated with this not very complex solid-side script. Now let's go further. So now let's talk about a little bit master pages. Master page is a technique in ASP.NET which allows to create templates for different web pages, because different pages, they have usually the same layout, same HTML elements like head, title, some parts of body, and so on. So for this reason, we are able to create some sort of template for these pages, which contains some windows or abilities to inject specific content for a specific web page. Also, master pages, they have an object-oriented support, because like web forms, like web pages, they have an object-oriented representation on the server side. And also, master pages can be nested. In this case, one master page could be a content for another master page. And let's see how we are able to use them, and how these master pages are created in our applications. So we basically can start with our web form, which we just used currently. It is connected to the master page, which is named site master, and this master page is here. And you can basically see this master page contains an HTML, contains head, body, and some other elements of HTML, and it also contains so-called contents placeholder, which is supposed to describe the contents for specific content web pages. And this content can be easily connected to a specific web page, like here, because here we have, for example, element content, which is connected to specific content placeholder with ID. For example, featured content. You can basically find it easily here. You can find it easily here. This is it. So one can also mention what this HTML version is HTML5. Now let's create a new web form, which is not very complex. First, I would like to create a new folder because later on I would like to restrict permissions to the specific folder. So let me do this by providing a name for this folder like product create. This will be okay. And let's create a new web form there. Here's a master page, and let's call it, for example, well, why not Dutch call them default. Okay. This web page will be connected to specific master page, which is just one in our project, which will be site master. Okay. It was created, and you can see that we have three content elements which are connected to corresponding content placeholders in the master. Well, we can create a title for our products page like this, and also we have to connect it to our navigation by just adding a basic link to it. So there will be a link to products create default. Okay, sounds good. Okay, we can even check if it works, but first we have to create a list view control, which is going to be used to retrieve some data from our ORM using entity data source element. Well, let's do this. Well, we can basically have here our element user control list view, which is not so complex, and we have to customize it because we have to choose specific data source for this element to populate it with data. As long as we do not have such an element on our web page, we are going to create one, and we are able to connect our data to SQL database, to our native framework data model, which we created previously, to link it to SQL contains data, or some objects in memory, ASPNET, which is specific file which describes the navigation of the website, and XML data file for which. So we're going to use entity framework, and the name of or identity of this created control entity data source will be entity data source 1. Okay. Now we have to select which entity data model we are going to use in our data source, which is just only one in our application we created previously, and now we have to specify which data we are going to retrieve and which operations with data we are going to implement. Insert data, everything. Okay, everything is done. Now we have to finally configure our list view, and we are going to use a grid, which is a table for our data, and we're going to use professional style for it, just to make it more and more interesting, and we're going to let almost everything that we are going to be there. All right, so basically we can just start our application, and we will see what there's a problem of ASP.NET, and we just need to wait for a while and refresh our web page. All right. Okay, sounds good. So we are working with our, we can see our data from our data table, and we are even able to make it in a page layout. Okay, I would like to adjust the number of items on each page, which is not so problematic because the created or generated code contains information about data pager, and it's possible to specify a so-called property there, a page size, and specify the number of elements on each page, which will be currently free. We can check it, and the result will be quite obvious because it will contain 3 elements as we wish, and we can browse for them quite easily. And also I have to highlight what back button in our browser works, and it's possible to create a new element even here. But I would like to say that it's not very good to insert this element by providing its product ID, because it's not supposed to be edited or specified because it's assigned by the database automatically. And also it's not good to specify it here, but it's obviously, but it's not edited here. All right, so let's exclude this text box from insertion string. Okay, let's find specific template for it, and just basically remove element or control which will go to represent this text box there. This is it, and I can basically just remove it. So currently we are able to see the result. Okay, so there's no more product ID here, and I can basically specify product name, some price, and some URL. And then press insert, go to the last page and see the results. It was added. Also, I can check it with my database, so it's possible to see it was added here. Let's try to, for example, delete something, the line with ID 20, delete, okay. Check it here, was it deleted? Yes, it was. So the next one, let's try to update some data. It's not so problematic. Let's edit it and try to make it something like here and update. All right, let's check it here again. Yes, so obviously can be same. Everything works fine. So we created data-driven and even data manipulation. We would like to also provide data sorting here. It's not so problematic as well. So let's do this by providing a specific so-called link button to the header of this particular table, because this is table actually. And how we can do this? We can find the layout for this table. This is it, and recall that the top row of this table is a header, which is even additionally highlighted by element DH. And we are going to use here element which is called a link button, which allows us to sort by names our elements. We provided a name for this element, and also we are going to specify some parameters or attributes or properties for it. Well, I need a property which is called comment name, and this comment currently is supposed to be sort because we want to sort this data. And also I have to provide a parameter additional which specifies which field will be used for sorting, and the sorting field will be name currently. So these two properties define automatically which action should be automatically performed by if this link button will be clicked. So the comment name will be sort with parameter name and will be recognized by the server like as a requirement to sort this particular data according by field name. So let's check it. Let's start it and see what's going to be there. Okay, now we see that this is really a link button. It allows us to click on it because other elements of here are still static text. We can click on it and see the result. It really sorts. It really sorts out. Nice, good. It's even possible to sort it in a vice versa, in a reverse order. Okay, so we did it. Let's go further. Validation. As we saw, it's possible for us to specify, for example, URL which does not correspond to real URL, or it's even might be possible to specify a very big number of symbols in each text box. How this can be mitigated and how we are able to reduce this problem. We are able to use validation controls in ASP.NET, which provides us ability to create both client-side and server-side validation of input data. The client-side validation is performed with JavaScript, which is already created and it's tested in different browsers, so you don't have to think how to implement this JavaScript on it. So you can basically just use these validation elements on your web page, and that's it. Also, this validation control, in a basic case, we provide ability to check if specific field is required to be filled. It's in more complicated cases, it's possible to check with them data types for specific input data controls, some ranges of data, or using regular expressions. And also there is an ability to summarize all of these rows using a so-called element validation summary. So let's see how it might be implemented in a very simple way. So let's get back to our back to our insert template, insert item template, and provide. Let's create a validation for this particular field, which is supposed to be to contain a URL. And what we're going to do, we're going to use elements which is called a regular expression validator. Let's install it here. And the first thing we have to do, we have to specify the parameter for this regular expression validator. We have to connect it to our specific text box. Well, it's not very complex because there's a special parameter here which is called validation control to validate. I have to find it. Yeah, this is it. You can see it here. And later we have to specify which regular expression have to be used here to validate data. This is supposed to be here with this parameter, validation expression, and unfortunately I don't remember which validation expression might be used to verify or validate a URL. For this reason, I have to just basically create a new element, a regular expression here, and I can go to the same property here and click on this button, and finally I have a list of ready to use regular expressions, and I can basically just specify internet URL here, a validation expression, and I can just copy paste the value of this property quite easily. As long as this control is not required for me anymore, I can just basically remove it, and I can get back here to my template and specify this parameter fine. So I can even check if it was there. Okay. 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 What expression validator, please? Yeah, that's it. This is it. This is validation expression. All right. So what we can do next, we can basically start our application. And we are able to see the results. So if we try to specify some raw data, there will be a regular expression validator here error, and it's possible to customize it with this error, this control. And if I will do like this, it will be okay. On the client side, and it's possible for me to specify some data and insert. Alright, so I can check. Yes, it's there, and it works correctly. It's also possible to use, or it's also good to use additional requirement, additional validation controls. For example, file field validator for this field, for this one, and for this one as well. And here it's also good to check the type of the data and the range of the price, because it's better to not specify a negative price, for example. But let's do this sometime later, not during our lecture, because it's quite obvious how to do this. Okay, let's go further. All right, now let's go to AJAX. Well, AJAX in ASP.NET can be implemented quite easily, because in ASP.NET there is a special control called update panel, and everything inserted in this update panel starts to work with AJAX manner. I want to say why this AJAX behavior in the first line called can be added to almost any page. Well, the answer is quite obvious, because in some elements, in some controls, AJAX is already utilized. For example, in the tree element, in the tree control, there's it contains all AJAX, because it allows to load, leave data from the server if the client will click on specifically. So this is quite obvious, but in most cases all pages can be transferred to AJAX completely, but in some cases it's not possible, so it might be useful. And also, don't forget, there's a special toolkit. It's a set of controls called AJAX Control Toolkit. This is a set of controls which are based on AJAX, and they provide some valuable features for your application, and you can use them in your web applications. Okay, now let's see how it might be implemented with AJAX, and let's simulate some server delays. All right, so what we would need? We need an element which is called update panel, and we have to put it somewhere in a good place, because we would like to use it in our web form. All right, it's here, and I'm going to try to enter some data here, because the contents of this element is so-called element content template, and everything which we want to be used there, it's supposed to be inside this element. So I'm going to insert the contents of current page there, and let's try to see if it works. All right, now I'm pressing the next button in the end, and it works. Can easily be seen. This is now AJAX update of the page. And I can show you what the back button is not activated now because it's completely AJAX behavior. And also possible to simulate this or the delay for this page. Okay, let's make this. To show some problems which occur if the server will not reply in a certain within a certain timeout, there's a special control called update progress, which will show its contents if the server will not reply in a correct with correct delay. So where is it? Looks like here. Let's put it here, and just basically let's write some text there. It will just represent the result which will be shown to the user if the server will not reply. Just say waiting for the server. All right. And now let's simulate the server delay. We are going to use a special event handler, which is called data binding. Where is it? For our list view, yes. And we are going to create here, simulate here delay by using this application, and 3 seconds will be enough. Okay, let's try it. Okay, pressing next, waiting for the server. All right, the next, again, waiting for the server. And later on it works nice. Okay, so it works. So let's go further. The security. It's almost the last topic, but not the last from the importance perspective. ASP.NET provides some security features out of the box, and these security features are represented by membership and roles. Membership provides ability to store user information like username and other parameters, including encoded password, and roles provides an ability to store roles and assign them to specific users. With ASP.NET, by utilizing these default features, there will be created a database for storing these user credentials and roles, and itself, this membership feature, it will be implemented with so-called form-based authentication with some controls which can be used in different pages, like login control, which contains already fields for username and password and login button and so on. Create user wizard, which will provide ability to create a new user or change password. So there's a little mistake here. It will change password like this. And it's also possible to use Active Directory connection with your ASP.NET application utilizing membership. Because Active Directory is a special security mechanism of Windows Service which stores user credentials for all users of specific network, and it's possible to use it for authentication, to authenticate with our application. However, if someone would not like default features of memberships and roles, it's possible to customize them by just basically creating their own classes and overriding specific methods and properties. So it's possible to create your own membership provider and use your own database and your own scheme of this database for storing user credentials, or store them in a different way, for example, in an XML file or whatever. So let's see how to use these default features to create users and roles and secure and create the form with our application. So we are going to use a feature called ASPNET configuration, which will start a special website, which will be used to store them, to provide some settings for our application. And we are going to start with security. First, we are going to create a user. The first user will be in. I'm going to create a password for him, for this user. And email is required if we would like to, if this user will forget his username, password, and it will be possible to submit with his or her email a link to reset the password. Let's create another user, which we'll call user. I'm going to use even the same password. And that's it. Now I'm going to create roles for our users. There will be 2 roles for them, admins and users. Now let's assign our users to these roles. It's not very complex because with admin we are going to have both roles. With user we are going to have just 1 role. Quite easy. Alright. And finally we have to create an access rules to our application. Now let's recall what we have in our application, our folder, which is called products create, which we created for storing our web form, and we're going to restrict an access to this folder. So we are going to restrict all users access to this folder, and we are going to add only users with role admins ability to access to this folder. So all non-authenticated users and all users without role of which are not enrolled admins will not be able to enter them. But these permissions have to be rearranged because they are working in this way. Once the user came to our application, and if he or she matches to the first line of these rules, then this rule will go there. So, for example, if admin will come here, it will match to the first line and it will be able to access to this folder. But if our users, no matter if they are authenticated or not authenticated, if they are authenticated maybe with role users, for example, we will not match to this first line, we will match to the next one, which will prevent them to access to this particular page or folder. All right, so now let's check if it works. Now I'll start with my application as usual, and I can see the difference because currently instead of my page, I'm seeing the login page. I can browse through all of our pages of my site as usual. But if I will try to go there, unfortunately there's a little trouble there because the name of the link is not correct. I'm going to fix it. It will be products. Yes. I can just basically update. Okay. So it asks me for credentials. Okay, I can try to log in there with admin credentials. And enter. So I can go there, I can browse through this page, I can do whatever I want, but if I will log off and try to go there again with user credentials, you can see I was authenticated, but I do not have an access to this page either because I do not have enough permissions to do this. All right. So currently we can see that the security works. Okay. So now we have to conclude with our lecture and just basically browse through things what was not covered. First thing what was not covered is MVC support or model view controller support of ASP.NET because there's a special type of ASP.NET MVC projects and corresponding other applications are created or developed in a different way. And all three components, model view controller, are created individually and then they are connected to each other. This is very useful for test-driven development, TDD. But the development itself, from my point of view, is more complex because in MVC, ASP.NET MVC, there is no controls. So everything is created with a layout of HTML elements on your own. However, it provides you an ability to get better, get closer to HTML, generative HTML. Also, we did not talk about web forms and Razor, which are different syntaxes for describing of web forms or web pages. Their HTML contents. And Razor is a more modern feature for this, and it provides a more simple syntax for doing the same things. It's more compact. We did not say much words about state management and caching because state management is very important for web applications because it provides an ability to store some server-side data between requests from the client side and connect this state to the client side by using client's cookie with session identifier. We did not about output caching of web pages because some pages might be cached and they do not have to be recalculated again. We did not talk about tracing because tracing it's also an interesting feature of ASP.NET which provides an ability to see how all events of a particular web page were processed and how much time was utilized for them and get a lot of interesting information of how the page was composed and how it actually works on the server side. We did not talk about remote debugging and debugging at all because it's also quite complex stuff. And with remote debugging, it's possible, for example, to debug web application which is installed on the web server from a Visual Studio installed on another computer. We want to talk about testing and creating test support from Visual Studio. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time for this. We did not talk about the configuration of web application, which is based on so-called .config files. These files have a special XML structure, and there is a special API for access to the information to this data, to these files. We will not talk about web services because this is also a very special type of web applications which requires additional consideration. And we were not talking about different code development tools, integrated development environments. We're talking only about the Visual Studio, and there is, for example, free to use that matrix development tool, which allows to create quite simple and in some cases quite complex websites, for example, like blog engines or wikis, which are based on existing content management systems quite easily. And we are not talking about free versions of Visual Studio, so-called Express versions, because Visual Studio itself is quite expensive, believe me. And Express versions, they also provide quite interesting features, but they are for free. We're not talking about Internet Information Services, a web server from Microsoft, which is usually used to install web applications, and we are not talking about the installation itself. It also contains some interesting information. And we were not talking about web forms, which are usually used for load balancing of huge loaded applications when several web services work simultaneously with the same application, and they should manage a huge number of requests from clients. And also, finally, I can say what the currently ASP.NET is almost open source, because lots of its features are examined with open source projects on Codeplex, and you can even participate to them on your own. And in some cases, these projects became a part of final ASP.NET package provided by Microsoft. And what a conclusion for ASP.NET. To develop ASP.NET web applications, there is a need to have some programming skills. For example, first skill is a knowledge of object-oriented programming, because everything is based on object-oriented programming there. The second one is the need to have skills in C# or Visual Basic.NET, because these two languages are usually used to develop ASP.NET web applications. It's also need to know web standards and web features, which are used usually, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. However, JavaScript knowledge is not so required for ASP.NET developer, because in many cases JavaScript can be generated automatically. And ASP.NET architecture is also required to be viewed by ASP.NET developers, because without knowledge of this architecture and, for example, event model of ASP.NET, it's not possible to create reliable applications. And object-related mappings is also very useful for ASP.NET, because all the data have to be stored somewhere, and there's a need to understand how to work with this data, how to retrieve it, and how to manipulate this. The main feature for ASP.NET, from my point of view, is its universality, because it allows to create corporate web applications. It allows to create quite simple websites. It might be used for sites with high load in internet sites, or even huge portals or simple web pages. Well, that's it for now. Thank you very much for your attention. And before I will finish, I'm going to show some additional stuff about the security of our application. One can say that, for example, if we will try to get an access to our products page, we will have here a right side of the page which says we'll use another service to log in. And this, for example, says, say a few words. It's possible to use, for example, OpenAD authentication, which is quite popular currently. Now let's open it, the same page in Chrome, because if I would like to configure, for example, authentication with Google, it will try to browse me to a Russian version of Google authentication page, which I would not like to show here. So how can I attach OpenAD authentication or Google authentication? Quite easily. I can go to the file global ASAX, which is supposed to be used to process global events of my application, and go to register of OpenAuth method call here, which is supposed to be used to register specific security provider. And I just basically can unconnect specific line for Google, and that's it. Now if I will just basically refresh this page, there will be a link to Google, and I can click on it and see a well-known page for Google authentication. So currently it's finally all, and thank you for your attention again. Thank you very much for viewing my presentation and lecture. Goodbye.